Hello everybody, I'm George from Ireland and I'm at Sunningdale Park in the United Kingdom. So I'm here really because this is where the Sunningdale Agreement was signed. I'm not sure if it's this actual building, but how apposite it is that the whole place, some of it is being demolished, the central building. But there's a finer building around here, which was the older, which is a stately home. I'm not really talking about the history of the house, here to talk about the Sunningdale Agreement. So I'd like to go in, guard dogs on patrol. Well, I don't think so, not in the daytime. I thought my cycle helmet at a glance, would they mistake it for a hard hat, these construction workers, or perhaps I ought to call them destruction workers. Anyway, back to the Sunningdale Agreement. So that was signed on the 9th of December 1973, and it was an attempt to find a peaceful solution to the Northern Ireland dispute. The trouble is, the actual belligerents were having none of it. So the troubles had exploded really in August 1969, and the security forces have been battling loyalist and Republican terrorists with mixed success. By 1973, the violence level was somewhat down from 1972, its peak, but it was still far worse than it had been in 1969. So the issue was, should Northern Ireland remain part of the United Kingdom or leave it and join the Republic of Ireland? So Unionists are those in Northern Ireland who say we want to maintain the union with Great Britain, and Nationalists are those in Northern Ireland who say we want to leave the UK and fuse with the Republic of Ireland. Obviously, the Irish government's strategy was in the long run to have Northern Ireland join the Republic of Ireland. The nationalist minority might grow a bit, but also by international pressure and so on, persuading London that this was in the best interests of the UK. Anyway, so cut to the chase. Then in May 1973, Edward Heath's Conservative government had published a white paper saying that what we ought to do is we're going to have a Northern Ireland Assembly. Stormont to the Parliament of Northern Ireland had been suspended for 1 year in February 1972 in the wake of the Bloody Sunday killings in Derry. And so to bring back legislature in Northern Ireland, call it an assembly, not a parliament, and be elected on the basis of proportional representation. Stormont had been elected on first past the post, except for in the early 1920s. So the idea, if it was done by PR, it wouldn't be so dominated by the Ulster Unionist Party, and the Ulster Unionists would therefore be forced to share power with the Social Democratic and Labour Party, the SDLP, that being the main voice of nationalism, led by John Hume. So indeed, they held an election on that to this assembly in 1973, that May, and the pro-agreement parties, they won 52 seats to 26 for the anti-agreement parties. Now, Sinn Féin wasn't actually seeking election back in those days, so the SDLP was the only nationalist party. The Ulster Unionist Party did quite well. They accepted the principle of the voluntary power sharing, not compulsory power sharing as we have today. The Democratic Unionist Party, led by the Reverend Ian Paisley, was dead against, with a few minor parties that we shan't distract ourselves with. Anyhow, so but they had to thrash out various other details. So Liam Cosgrave had become Taoiseach of the Republic of Ireland, that's as Prime Minister, and Fine Gael was this party, the more moderate of the two major parties in the Republic of Ireland. So London found it a bit easier to deal with him than they did with Fianna Fáil. Anyway, so where were they to meet to discuss all this? Well, they said, we can't meet in Northern Ireland because the security situation is too bad. We can't meet in the Republic of Ireland because Unionist politicians or UK ministers are at too high a risk of being assassinated by the IRA. So we'll meet in Great Britain. So this was a civil service training college, and it ceased to be used for that purpose about 2010. Been used for various other things. Won't go into that. Anyway, so what was the next thing? So over 3 days, they thrashed out the agreement, and there was going to be a Council of Ireland. This had been envisaged by the 1921 treaty, and so the Council of Ireland would be comprised of people nominated by Dáil Éireann, as well as the Northern Ireland executive. That was effectively the cabinet of Northern Ireland, as was to be. And in the cabinet, the Ulster Unionists would share power with the SDLP, who'd have a few other positions, and indeed the Alliance Party, a very moderate pro-union party, and that would handle various issues for the whole of Ireland. Anyway, so this went ahead. Brian Faulkner was leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, formerly Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, and so it was signed, and so there was a little bit of optimism, but That election in which pro-agreement parties in May 1973 had accepted this principle had been boycotted by supporters of the IRA. I mean, Sinn Féin wasn't even standing for election, and indeed the INLA hadn't really come into being, the official IRA. So perhaps the elections overstated the support for this kind of solution. Now, the IRA sort of took a Trotskyite attitude, the worse the better. They, in one sense, they didn't want concessions. They wanted the situation to be found unacceptable by the nationalist minority, such that someone would throw their support behind the IRA. Anyway, so the executive was set up, and this Council of Ireland was set up, but it was only meant to be about animal health and tourism. Now, there was virtually no tourism in Northern Ireland at the time. Who would go there? Because it really had the worst reputation in Western Europe, because there was violence on television every night. It was just too easy for journalists to report. A highly developed country where everybody spoke English and journalists weren't in danger. Only one journalist was killed in the whole of the Troubles. God, this construction worker is glowering at me. Anyway. So the executive had only been functioning for 6 weeks before Edward Heath called an election in February 1974. It was the Who Governs Britain election about strikes. Well, really, the election was called earlier, sort of like late January, but polling day was right at the end of February, in which he narrowly lost. Actually, got more votes than Labour, but fewer seats. As people said, who governs Britain? If you even have to ask the question, the answer's not you, mate. So Harold Wilson and his Labour government came into office. Now, the DUP, led by that Free Presbyterian minister, Paisley, said this is outrageous, this Sunningdale Agreement, you're being a Lundy and you're bowing the knee to terrorism and so on. Although it emerged decades later, but the year before, the DUP had contemplated some sort of voluntary power sharing agreement with the SDLP. But the thing is, that would have been probably toxic for both sides. A lot of SDLP members said, we are not getting into bed with this anti-Catholic demagogue Paisley, and some of the DUP would have said to the Reverend Paisley, we can't possibly cooperate with the SDLP because they're nationalists. Some of the DAP supporters were anti-Catholic as well. So that never got off the ground. And then Hugh Logue, this SDLP councillor, he perhaps unwisely said, well, this Sunningdale Agreement, this Council of Ireland, will trundle Unionists into a united Ireland. And that got out. And of course, that's the SDLP's objective. They want Northern Ireland to join the Republic. That's a perfectly respectable position. They never made any secret about that. But the DUP managed to spook the Unionists who were sort of sitting on the fence, who found it difficult to make up their mind about the Sunningdale Agreement. There was a disagreement about the long-term future of the Council of Ireland. For Unionists, it was the end, no more political development. For Nationalists, it was only the beginning, that the Council of Ireland would get more and more competences and eventually cause the Republic of Ireland to absorb Northern Ireland. And a few mainland British politicians wanted that as well, because they were beginning to see Northern Ireland as a problem, which is exactly what the IRA wanted them to do, see it as a costly nightmare that they wanted to rid themselves of. Anyway, so then there was still a lot of violence in early 1974, and there was the Ulster Workers' Council that went on strike, particularly at power stations. And these people were overwhelmingly Protestant and therefore mostly Unionists. So it was very difficult to get things to function. Now, loyalist terrorists of the UDA, or that wasn't actually banned at the time, they carried out their crimes under the name of Ulster Freedom Fighters. The Ulster Volunteer Force, which was banned, which was definitely a terrorist organisation, they were intimidating people into not going to work. So society was barely functioning, and you can't do many jobs these days without electricity, or even in 1974. There was a proposal to split the grid of Northern Ireland to at least keep some of Northern Ireland functioning, get more power from the Republic of Ireland. It wasn't happening. Harold Wilson wanted the British Army to run some power stations, but they said they couldn't do it. Some people interpreted that as them refusing. Were they just simply disobeying the orders of the civilian government? Was that a kind of a mutiny? Was this a sort of a Curragh mutiny all over again? Anyway, so Brian Faulkner had become very unpopular. He was still leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, but about 40% of his party had voted against the Sunningdale Agreement, but that grew and grew. People who felt it was going wrong, they were under increasing pressure from the DUP, and these guys are fascinated with what I'm saying. So then Faulkner said he just couldn't carry on, and the executive resigned. Well, the Ulster Unionists just withdrew from it, the moderates, the Faulknerites. There have been pro-Faulknerites and anti-Faulknerites within the Ulster Unionist Party. So that was the end of it in May 1974. Now, loyalists were jubilant. That's the more uncompromising sort of Unionists. So it was brought to grief.